All right, let's get right into it. There was this big operation by ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, down in Houston recently. And, on the surface, it's about a bunch of arrests. But when you dig a little deeper, it really pulls back the curtain on a much bigger national story. One that's all about local policing, federal law, and this huge debate that's playing out in cities all over the U.S.
So what exactly went down? Well, between April 6th and 17th, the ICE office in Houston made 277 arrests. All of these were non-citizens who were in the country illegally. But honestly, that number is just the beginning of the story. Because get this, according to ICE, those 277 people had been convicted of a whopping 751 crimes combined. That's a really important detail, right? It tells you this wasn't just some random sweep. This was a highly targeted operation.
So let's zoom in on what actually happened in Houston and take a look at who specifically was taken into custody.
And when you look at the breakdown, wow, the list is pretty intense. We're talking about 17 convicted child predators, 16 drug traffickers, 15 gang members, and even 6 people convicted of murder. And then there's this one case they highlighted, a member of the MS-13 gang who'd already been sentenced to 228 years for a homicide back in El Salvador.
So who are the folks carrying this all out? That would be ICE's Enforcement and Removal Operations, or ERO for short. As you can see here, their job is pretty straightforward. Find, arrest, and remove non-citizens who are breaking U.S. immigration laws, and they especially focus on those considered a threat to public safety.
But here's where the story gets really interesting. This whole operation, it didn't just happen in a bubble. No, it landed smack in the middle of this growing feud between the city of Houston and the federal government, which just adds a whole other layer to this thing.
So what was this fight all about? Well, it really gets to this fundamental and pretty tricky question about what role local police should play, or if they should play any role at all, in federal immigration enforcement.
And this timeline, this says it all. It perfectly captures the tension. Look at the dates. ICE is in the middle of their 10-day operation, and then bam, on April 8th, the Houston City Council votes to actually reduce how much their local police can cooperate with ICE. The timing here is just incredible and really shows you how tense things were. And this is where you see these two completely different philosophies just collide. On one hand, you have ICE, and their position is simple. Hey, working with local cops helps us get dangerous people off the streets. It keeps everyone safer. But then you have the Houston Council saying, hold on, we need to limit this, arguing that if local police start acting like immigration agents, it destroys trust and might make immigrant communities too scared to even call 911 to report local crimes.
And believe me, the federal government was not quiet about this. Here's a quote from Paul McBride. He's the ICE field office chief in Houston. He put out this really stark warning, basically saying that if the city limits cooperation, there are going to be immediate negative consequences for public safety and national security. And just when you think it's a city versus feds thing, nope, the state of Texas jumps into the fray. Governor Greg Abbott stepped in and basically turned up the heat, threatening to cut public safety grants to Houston if the city actually followed through on its plan. Okay, so what's happening in Houston is fascinating, but you have to understand it's really just a local snapshot, a microcosm of this massive national debate over immigration policy that has just been getting more and more intense. To really get the vibe of the moment, you have to look at this national policy timeline. In just a few months, the Trump administration made a series of huge moves. We're talking a hold on asylum applications, a pause on visa processing from dozens of countries. I mean, it was one major action right after another, creating this feeling that the whole system was constantly shifting. But of course, these moves were met with a ton of pushback. Critics, like Democratic Senator Alex Padilla, came out and argued that all these rapid-fire sweeping changes were just creating chaos. He said they left immigrants, and I'm quoting here, completely lost and basically unable to figure out how to follow the law. And this slide really boils it all down pretty well. The administration's argument for these policies was all about national security and protecting the economy. But the criticism was focused on how they did it, arguing that making these huge changes with very little explanation just sowed confusion and made it impossible for people to navigate the legal system. So we've looked at the Houston arrests, we've seen the local politics, we've touched on the national policy, but what is this whole thing really about when you get right down to it? And this table does a great job of laying out that fundamental split. The argument for cooperation is all about safety and security. It's this idea that all law enforcement should be on the same team to uphold the law. But the argument for separation is about roles and responsibilities. The idea that local police should focus on local crime to build community trust, and that there should be a hard line between their job and the job of federal immigration agents.
And that brings us right to the final, central question that this whole situation forces us to ask. It's a question that cities like Houston and honestly the entire country are wrestling with right now. How do you find that perfect balance between a city's own local priorities and federal immigration law? And as you can probably tell, there are no easy answers here.